So for the 400th episode of the podcast, we're absolutely delighted to have Billy Sherwood here with us today, and Mark is here as well. So hello, Billy.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. So let's get started with some questions then. It's always great to see your Facebook updates and a bit humbling to see how much you're working. The latest photo, I think, was news that you're working on bass parts for a forthcoming Peter Banks project. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I don't know much other than the people who are handling the estate for Peter are kind of in control of the project. And I was asked on board to play some bass tracks, and Jay Shellen did some drum tracks, and Tony Kaye's on there as well. So yes, alumni involved there.
Yeah.
And, Peter was obviously an amazing musician and one of the founders of Yes. So we had a relationship over the many years, and he played on several of my records as well. I have his last overdub, unfortunately, on one of the Prague Collective records that I made.
Yeah.
So when I was asked to do it, it was a no-brainer that I wanted to be involved and honor Peter in the best way I could.
Hi, Billy. It's Mark, by the way. How well did you know Peter, and how was it like working with him?
I didn't know him extremely well. I mean, we knew each other through emails and telephone calls, and we did meet in person on several occasions during Yes tours whenever we were passing his neck of the woods, so to speak. But, I wasn't as close with Peter, per se, as I was with Chris, for instance. But, he was a Yessie, and, you feel close to these guys, even if you don't know them quite as well. There's so many of us now at this point. But, there was a closeness there in the bond of Yes, if you will.
Yeah.
But that was about, as close as we got.
What I am curious about, just to follow up really quickly, is having had the blessing to work with people like Steve Howe, like you are right now. How would you compare Peter's guitar style compared to like Steve? Like, what do you think their differences are in guitar playing?
Well, I think Peter was coming from that rock and roll perspective of guitar, and I think Steve is from a more sort of succinct direction, wanting to incorporate that Chet Atkins, sort of rock and roll style into progressive rock, which is what I think defined Steve in that way. And then he took that and turned it into his own brand. So I think the two of them have a very distinct style, as Trevor Rabin does as well. They all have different styles, but they're all great players in their own right.
Well, let's talk about your latest solo album, Citizen in the Next Life, which I think sort of continues the story from the 2015 album, The Citizen. I listened to it, and it's once again a really enjoyable concept album as the citizen travels through time and different characters. And I particularly liked Monet, which I think is beautiful, and the 9-minute Hold Quiet, although it seems to be differently titled in different places, Hold Quiet or Hold Quite, which is a kind of immersive and fascinating song with lots of great acoustic guitar. But you worked on this entirely yourself this time, so there were no guests, and there were lots of guests on the previous album. Why do it yourself this time?
Well, when the label reached out for me to do a second album, this is one of the things they mentioned, which is we were thinking we'd like you to do this by yourself, like you're sort of used to doing some of your other solo albums, and see how that turns out. What do you think? And, I enjoy working both ways, with people and without.
Yeah.
It's obviously easier to work without others because you don't have to think about what you're composing for someone, and you can just paint randomly onto the canvas and go for it. So it was an enjoyable process. And as you said, it sort of allowed me to go further down the road with this concept, which I enjoy writing about things from history and trying to imagine myself in these various time periods. And so it's a great outlet in that regard to be able to have that kind of direction and focus on when you're writing an album. Normally I'm just writing music to write music. It's not with such a pointed direction. So I enjoy it.
So obviously the next question, which has to be asked, I think, is this going to be an ongoing series of albums? And really, how far can the Citizen go?
Well, I mean, the Citizen character is endless because there's so much to write about in history. We haven't even scratched the surface of so many amazing people and what they've done to change the trajectory of humanity and science and arts and whatnot. So it could go on forever. It's just a matter of, does the label want to continue making these types of records. I was very surprised that they wanted to make a second one, to be honest with you. So you just never know. We'll have to see where this goes.
Well, one thing I was always curious about is, do you go on, when you make these records, do you already have the characters in mind before you even start making the record? Like the next one, I'm thinking about using these characters, or is it just this kind of spur of the moment thing?
Yeah, I just let the moment take me, and I never really know what's going to inspire that moment. For instance, I was just searching around YouTube, watching some crazy DARPA videos and robotic stuff, and I stumbled into this robot named Sophia, and realized by watching it and learning more about what was going on there, that the government of Saudi Arabia actually made her a legal citizen. So she's the first citizen robot of the world. And I found that to be incredibly interesting to write about, and how perfect for this record citizen that I'm making to incorporate her into it. And the whole concept of the song is, while this is fantastic and amazing, it's also very scary to think about. And is this really what we want to do? Just because you can doesn't mean you should, as it says in the song. So that inspiration came through that. Other things happened in strange ways, where I was writing the music for The Partisan, and I had no lyrical ideas at the time, but I knew this track was feeling very aggressive and sort of in your face and angry and just, had this attitude. So I started immediately thinking about, who are the monsters from history to tap into and hear and sing about. And of course, the biggest monster of all, we know Adolf Hitler. It just came to mind, and the concept of the fact that this one guy who started a lonely partisan, on his own, going through World War I and coming out the other side, and then doing what he did and rising to power, and then subsequently all that power diminishing and finding himself back alone, essentially, in a bunker and taking his own life. I just found that arc of life to be an incredible journey and very interesting, although it's extremely dark. But that became something I wanted to write about. So I never really know where these inspirations are coming from. Nothing's ever really preconceived too much in my world, because there's so much going on that I'm writing in the moment, living in the moment of it, really.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you about Skywriter. Is that a flute on there?
It is a mellotron flute.
It's a mellotron flute. All right. That's
school,
great.
Yeah. It gives it a very, once I played that, I was like, wow, this got a Beatles vibe. And then so I just sort of leaned into the Beatles wind on that one with the bass line and the melodies and stuff. Yeah, I like that song.
So is that something you do? Have you got lots of sort of vintage like that?
Well, actually, I have no vintage equipment,
right.
But what I do have are amazing soft synth palettes. And one of the main palette that I turn to religiously is from the IK Multimedia Library. My friend Dave Kersner, who owns that company with his brother, turned me onto it many, many years ago, and it is the staple. It's where I go to for all of the vintage sounding Rhodes or the vintage
it's fantastic
sounding, synths and mini moogs and mellotrons and all that. So that's what that is. It's a mellotron flute.
Well, it's very effective on that. I really like that. So let's talk about live now. I first saw you with Yes on the Open Your Eyes tour in 1998, which I absolutely loved. And that was my first Yes concert, in fact. But before we talk about the Royal Affair tour, which is your most recent live outing, take us back to the Talk tour, which I think was your first with the band. Now, it was a rather different lineup in those days. So how does it compare with the 2019 live Yes experience for you?
Well, it's both exactly the same and completely different. It's kind of a conundrum. I got to tour, as you said, with this other version, this other lineup, these other personalities. And it was actually the end of that lineup, the very end of the 90125 lineup. So I got to witness things in a way that were a big eye-opener for me, not only as a Yes fan, but as someone kind of beginning to work closely with this band as a musician, and the politics that go on and just the navigation from day to day to get through the days. But that said, it was a super interesting period and really valuable for me, not only just in my working with Yes and figuring them out, but understanding what being on the road was all about, and touring and all that stuff. Because while I'd had many bands leading up to that and many record deals, they never really took flight in a way where I got out on the road in such a way. So that was a huge eye-opener. And now, fast forward to now, I mean, I never in a million years imagined I'd be playing bass with Yes, because we all thought Chris was going to outlive us all. Mm-hmm. And, I'm doing the best I can with that. And I know Chris wanted it to continue. And the band's playing great. We just finished a great tour playing Gates of Delirium and other stuff. And so, we're all very excited to keep it going. And we've already discussing now the plans for the 2020 tour and beyond. So there's no stopping this train, that's for sure. I see a lot of predictions online about when it's going to end and this guy's out and he's going. And this, meanwhile, this thing just like a zombie just keeps walking straight on through.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I got to say, though, living in Canada, I don't always get to see you guys whenever you guys go on tour, but I was overjoyed, to say the least, when I saw that the Royal Affair Tour was coming to Toronto. So obviously I got to see you guys, or you specifically, play with Yes and Asia on the Royal Affair Tour. So what I'm curious about is what was that like? And do you prefer to play these kind of festival shows, or do you just prefer to do just a full Yes show?
Well, I really enjoy playing with Asia because it's a different style of music completely, really, even though it's considered in the same genre, proggy sort of rock. The compositions of the bass part are completely coming from a different place. So it allows me to play a different style. And playing with Carl Palmer, who's one of my drum heroes, when I was growing up, it was Alan White and Carl Palmer, So for me, that is an amazing thing. And Jeff, of course, is my buddy, and it's great to play with him. And this last tour with Ron singing, which was wonderful, and Steve Howe joining us, I'm looking across the stage and thinking, how did I end up in two bands with Steve Howe? How did this happen? But it was fantastic, and if they do it again, I'm sure I'll be involved. I hope I will be, and I would love to do it. It's different playing it in a festival. It made my days very, very busy, where normally I don't have to show up at the gig until 5 or 6. I was having to get there sometimes at 1 or 2 just to make the sound checks happen, and 2 different meet and greets, 2 different gigs. So sometimes I'd get there at 1 and I wouldn't leave till 1. So very, very long days in that regard. But I have no regret, and I'm not complaining. I love it. I love playing music. And, if there's another band out there who needs a bass player, just call me. I'm ready to go. Maybe Ross wants to take a break. I don't know.
What was it like? Because you did have the singing gig, didn't you, with Asia for a time? What was that like handing it over?
Well, I did one tour with them, and we did 45 shows opening for Journey, ironically. I enjoyed singing and playing bass. I do that in my own bands. A lot of times I'm the lead singer, bass player. And I also enjoy just kicking back and singing background vocals and not having that burden. And on this tour, Ron did a fantastic job. And when they asked me about it, I said, I think that's a great idea, especially because I have my hands full with what's coming in the Yes set this time around with Gates and all the singing that has to go on with that. Yeah. So it worked out perfectly, and I think Ron fit in like a glove, and he's an amazing musician and singer and just a fantastic guy, fun to be around. So it was all good. I had no problem with it, no attitude towards it, and just wanted it to be good,
Yeah. So I just have one quick follow-up before we go on to another Yes question. I've been a longtime follower of Ron, and I think he did an absolutely stellar job with you guys playing guitar and singing. I mean, it's such a different world playing guitar and singing, because, I mean, playing Steve Howe's guitar parts alone is a challenge enough, and then to sing on top of it is just that much more of a challenge, I'm very sure. I heard in another podcast that Carl Palmer had mentioned that he had enjoyed it so much that he was thinking about maybe even taking the band and maybe even doing some sort of a recording album-wise. Do you have any kind of info in that? Is this lineup going to stay permanent and maybe do something in the studio?
I don't know. We'll have to see. I mean, historically, in all of the bands that I'm not the sort of on-point leader of, Circa, Yoso, Logic, whatever, New World Trade, I'm always the last one to know what the hell's going on. So, you're just asking the wrong guy. Usually I get the call, hey, here's what we're doing. Do you want to do it? Yeah, it sounds great. Let's go. So I haven't really spoken to anyone about studio recordings, but, if that's something that they want to do and they want me there, I'm there.
Great. Well, we can't have you on and not ask you about what's next for Yes. You've already mentioned the 2020 tour that you've been discussing so far. And the rumour mill, of course, at the moment is completely in overdrive, as usual, about a new album. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, I could tell you basically what I just told you, which is I am always the last one to know. So I really don't know what's going on with the studio side of things until we find out, really for sure. The rumor mill does turn, but we want to make a new album. It's just a matter of when and how. But I don't have any details as to, we're going in the studio on this date. And I just, it's kind of loose.
Okay. So one of the comments that were made about Heaven and Earth was that, which you were involved in, but only really at the final stage of it, was that it wasn't given enough time to fully develop. How are you guys kind of approaching the writing for this next supposed record?
Well, there has to be writing starting, and I haven't really heard anything about this yet.
There have been some posts from, Jeff and those guys saying that Jeff and Alan have been together working on some material and stuff like that. Whether that's Yes material or not, I guess that's up in the air, but there's always been this running rumor with that photo that they're working on Yes material.
Well, I think that's more of a fan-driven thing than anything. I don't really know. I'm not there. They're in England doing that stuff. They may very well be, but I don't really know. I mean, it's not the type of band where we have band meetings every 2 days to see what we're each guy's up to. So it's kind of loose in that regard. So until there's a rock solid plan, I have really no intel in this department. And I think all the fan speculation is very fun to watch and positive, of course, but I don't take much stock in it because until I see it with my own eyes, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's very wise. However, you must have some opinion about what you would like to see in a new Yes album and how you would like it to be approached.
Well, I think it's just got to be a great album. That's the long and short of it. I don't really care about song lengths and how it has to be 20 minutes to be an epic and all that stuff. It's just got to be great. It's got to have magic, got to have a vibe. And, those are vague notions that come into the light once you really start getting into making an album and discovering what you've got. And you never really know what you've got until you're in it. So it's easier to talk about what you want than to actually figure it out. So I don't do much speculating about the kind of music that's going to come either from any band I'm in or a solo album. I just get in there and do it, and then see what I got afterwards.
What I was just curious about, I mean, obviously you've already answered the whole thing about this, that, you don't really know yet what's going on with the writing and so on and so forth. But the one thing I am kind of curious about is that having heard Citizen 2 now, one of the things I found about this that was fantastic is the production. You've always had fantastically produced records. I've always said that one of the things that I was always overjoyed when I heard that you rejoined the band was the possibility of having somebody who's such a great engineer like you and a great producer like you in the band and could be involved now with those sorts of things and even the songwriting. You're such a great writer. I mean, one thing I'm kind of curious about is if the situation did arise, would you be willing to produce the next Yes album?
If the band wanted me to do that, I would certainly do it. That said, sometimes in bands, there was a feeling during the latter days that we needed a producer and I should not produce because I'm too close to it. I don't really believe that notion, but I don't want to argue with my colleagues over that stuff either. I'm a band guy, majority rules. Let's take a vote. What do we want to do? Let's go that direction. Fine with me. Mm-hmm. So we'll just have to see what happens when the time comes. But I mean, I appreciate all the kind words and the notions in that regard, but we'll just have to see what happens.
Right. So 2020 is going to be really interesting for Yes. And one of the things that was fantastic about 2018 was that you got Tony Kaye back and you had Patrick Moraz back. And obviously, I'm not asking you to tell us what's happening. Those are the sort of collaborations you think the band should be doing and you enjoy doing?
Well, I mean, I love working with Tony. There's no disputing that. And of course, if the chance ever came up to do it again, I would. But I don't know. I think the band, if it's going to make an album, is going to want to go back to its sort of normalcy and make that kind of record where it's a band, you know what I mean? And it's really a band making a record. I think the guest artist things were more geared towards the 50 because we were celebrating the notion of all these different alumni and whatnot. Yeah. But I think if the band's going to make a record, it's going to make a record as a band.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, well, listen, thank you very much indeed for joining us to celebrate our 400th episode. It's been fantastic to speak to you, and I wish you all the best with all your projects, which I know are many and varied. And we really look forward to seeing Yes back next year, touring and with an album, who knows? But anyway, for the moment, thank you very much indeed, Billy.
Thanks, Billy.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been fun, and we'll do it again anytime.
I've an All Yes Music podcast every week. I love to hear what Kevin says.